Nick, and I'm the host of the show, and I should be co-hosting it with Jeff, who you can probably see as well at the top of the screen. And this afternoon for you, we've got Jeremy Thompson and Colin French, who have kindly offered to come along and tell you about their small layouts, their experience with small layouts, anything that they think's quite important to look at while you're thinking of designing your own small layout. So we are going to start the presentation very shortly with a couple of very short YouTube videos, hopefully to get the conversation going. But in the meantime, can we just run through a little bit of housekeeping? You've all been muted as you join the session this afternoon. If you would stay muted, we'd be very grateful. And if you want to ask the two chaps any questions, then please do so through the chat function. If you hover your cursor along the bottom of the screen, you'll find the chat function. If you click on that, then you can ask a question to myself or Jeff, and we will then invite you to unmute yourself and ask the participants, and hopefully we can get the conversation going from there. Also, just to point out to you all that this is being recorded, so if you don't want to appear in the recording, then keep your video switched off. That's absolutely fine. We don't have a problem with that, but do bear that in mind. That it is being recorded, and we will be putting all this online later. Great. Okay, so we'll make a start then with a couple of little YouTube videos that Jeremy's made for us. They showcase his layout. Maybe some of you have seen Colin's layout this morning in another part of the show, where he's been presenting his small layout, or it may be even the presentation that he did a couple of weeks ago, where he did an evening with presentation, and him and another participant whose name escapes me.
Thomas Hoy with Whatload was the other guy.
Okay, great. Right, well, we'll start by watching Jeremy's YouTube presentations. So if I can get those going, I should have shared the screen there with you. And now we should be able to watch.
Welcome to Redemption Street, Acton.
I think I put these the wrong way around. Just a second. Let's.
Yes.
Sorry about this, everyone. That's a bit of a cock up. There we go.
Welcome to part 2 of Redemption Road, Acton. This is the second version of the layout I operate. This time with a small oil and gas facility. And then some more tanks and so forth, but retains the other platform. So I'm just going to show you a couple of maneuvers on this part of the layout. And then maneuvering it back onto the layout into position. Redemption Road can be a pretty busy place, but it's very simple to operate and gives you a chance to do, about basically a half an hour of operations. And you get bored, you can swap out for the parcels version. It's been a lot of fun to build, very simple, and as I say, with 2 versions provides quite a lot of variety to operate. So thanks for watching. my O-scale micro. Quick tour of the layout.
Lost some sound.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened to the sound there. It's definitely on the video.
This part is maneuvering the parcels coach off the layout. And onto the sector plate. So this is the parcels part of the layout, and now I'm going to show you the second version of the layout, which is the oil and gas part of the layout.
Jolly good. Jolly good. I did enjoy that. You can't beat a bit of DCC sound, can you? And it works particularly well with diesels, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So tell us, Jeremy, tell us about your layout. It's a very impressive looking thing there.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It started really with a box that I received from my father-in-law, and I saw this box and thought immediately, sort of being a railway guy, I thought, what can I do with this box? And really taking the top off, it came out to 60 inches by 13 inches in width. That was still too short. I did some experiments with it, and you really can't do, from what I wanted to achieve, much with with 60 inches. So actually it's now 7 feet long. So it's still very manageable. You can store it. In fact, I stored it on a top shelf in a cupboard, or you can store it upright. Its experiments showed that I could have, two main sidings, as you saw, a point, and two smaller sidings on the scenic section. So it was just the size I felt for a quick build, and good enough for a half hour of gentle shunting. I mean, my idea of railway modeling really in the evening is when everybody else is watching television. I'd rather just spend half an hour shunting and fiddling around with this little layout, just enjoying that, enjoying the visual creativity. It wasn't really hard to build. It's just one point, as I said. I think that the key thing is getting the clearances right, to make sure. Now you'll notice I got a parcels coach on there, and some people might say that's madness. You can't run big stock on a little layout. And I thought, well, I thought I would have a go. I mean, I've actually sort of thought, the clearances were built for that parcels coach, and actually it can be maneuvered on and off the layout onto the sector plate, and also uses 3 out of the 4 sidings. It's just one siding it can't use, and it provides, I would say, presence on a small layout to have a big piece of stock like that. and it just made it more enjoyable that it's actually got lighting inside it, and there's the red tail lamp on there. So even if you're operating this layout in low light, it still works. You can still see some lights on the layout. And then really, as Ian Rice, who some of you would know, would say, lack of scope can be a problem on a layout like this. So I developed two versions, as you can see. I'm probably going to develop a third version as well, with just a sort of a private siding. I partly grew up in West Somerset, so I'm very familiar with that area of the West Somerset Railway. I mean, you used to watch that growing up when they just restarted it as a preserve line. And I thought, you know what, I want to do something on that to honor that time in my childhood that I enjoyed the West Somerset Railway. So I will probably do a third version there. But to get back to this, I think the key thing is to make it really, really run well. You've got to have the sector plate that takes the parcels coach and the Class 08. It will not take the parcels coach and the pannier tank. The pannier tank's just about an inch too long, but at some point you have to stop and say, okay, it's still a micro, and they have limitations. But I've had fun. So if I get bored with one, I'll swap it out for the other. And I think if I was able to bring it to an exhibition, I'd probably run one version in the morning and then another one in the afternoon, just to give it some variety.
Can I ask you a question? Does oh, and by the way, if anybody else wants to join, chip in with a question, then please do. Please type it into the chat function at the bottom of the screen, and I can then get you to unmute yourself and pose the question yourself. I was going to ask this question for both of you, really. I assume that the micro layouts are ready to go. If you've got them lent up against a wall, you can then pop them on the tabletop, and they're ready to go. They don't need hours and hours of wiring and setting up or anything like that.
Colin, you want to go first on that one?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes. I think, as I said, those of you that the evening with a couple of weeks ago, all my layouts are built with an end framing, so they can stand on their end. In fact, you can see they're all stacked up. 5 of them are stacked up behind me, so there's no difficulty in there. I mean, I've got my small one here, my 25.5-inch one. I just pick it up like that, put it on the table, plug it in, and play trains. That's as easy as that. Brilliant.
Yeah, same with me. I mean, it's I'm looking for no more than 10 minutes to set it up. So I've got the stock, the box, and then a box with some buildings on it. Because again, I'm interchanging buildings in and out of the two versions. And then my goal is to get up in 10 minutes. You run it for 30, 40 minutes, and then you can put it away.
Absolutely.
And it can run on a couple of, I've got a couple of what's called in the United States sawhorses, but I don't know what they're called in the UK. But the other thing would be a couple of, you can run it on a shelf, you can run it on a dining room table, although I cover it with something first. You can run it almost anywhere.
Excellent. That's very good. And it's fully DCC, I saw as well.
Yeah, DCC, again, simple wiring, as Colin said, simple. The wiring's simple. So it's 2 wires that's set up to a Digitax DCC. But I think DCC in sound has really enhanced this little layout, just gives it a lot more interest. And I went fully DCC, quite a few years ago now.
I can see that DCC would be one of those things that simplifies everything. You don't need to have acres and acres of wiring underneath the board, around the point work and so on. I could see that would be a big boom for a layout such as this. Yeah, it's very interesting. Do you think you could possibly make a layout that was smaller than 7 feet?
Well, I'm being challenged by seeing Colin's layout and thinking, gosh, I thought I made a micro until I saw his. So yeah, it could go smaller. Without the parcels coach, you could definitely go down to 5 feet, I think. But
I mean, the fiddle yard must take up a fair chunk of the. Is it a sector plate on yours?
It's a sector plate. I think it's either 23 or 24 inches. I think it's is 23 inches, I think.
Right, that's great. What about yours then, Colin? I think you were demonstrating yours this morning, weren't you?
Well, my smallest one here, I've got a traverser on this one that holds a small loco and one wagon, and it's 12 inches long,
Right.
the traverser. And the scenic part of the layout is 13.5 inches, so the whole thing is 25.5 inches long.
And what's that based on? An engine shed?
Oh, that's an accurate model of Chlamidos Treacle Works.
Treacle Works?
Oh, absolutely, in Chlamidos, if you know where that is.
No idea.
It's an accurate scale model of it. You know, I've studied long and hard about the manufacturing of treacle, from bringing the black treacle ore in mineral wagons to it going out in closed vans. It's a science in itself.
I bet.
I do take my modelling very seriously.
Well, I'm sniggering here, but only because of the feat of engineering that you've achieved there. Really. That's amazing.
But the one that's on the show video is 4 foot long. That's my maximum footprint. Is 4 foot long.
Right. I mean, it's a common problem in old gauge, really, isn't it? I think we've all been there, haven't we? Trying to design a layout in an average-sized, kind of home, and it's very difficult, isn't it? Because you look at a train with 3 or 4 coaches, and the thing, can be pushing 4 or 5, even 6 feet long, and it's very difficult, isn't it, to fit something in, and then a reasonable length of track and a 6 foot radius minimum curve. So yeah, it's a bit of a science, I can see, isn't it? If anybody else wants to join in, by the way, do stick your question in the chat box below, and I'm more than happy to get you to unmute yourself, and you can ask these chaps the questions yourselves. But yes, it's.
Could I ask Colin a quick question? His layout that we've seen this morning relies on gravity. Could he tell me what angle he has to have the layout at exhibitions to achieve the gravity?
Yes, just one moment. I'll get you the technical piece of equipment. I can actually demonstrate it. It's very technical, this, Keith. I don't know whether you can manage this or not down in Devon, but there we are. If you can see that.
Hold it up. Oh, yes.
They're very technical pieces of equipment there. That's foam rubber. And they just put them under the fiddle yard end, and that's just enough to get it rolling. And I'll just prod it along with the coupling up so nobody can see it.
So you have to make sure you get the right thickness then.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Margaret's got this off to a T. Well, anybody else is, Margaret's my wife, and she does most of the operating whilst I go around talking at exhibition.
Thank you for your help.
That's a pleasure, dear boy.
So there are no locos on your layout, and it's just gravity.
Oh no, I've got the Sentinel. I've got to have a loco that pushes it up the hill for it to run down.
Yeah, I suppose you have as well.
Yeah.
Thoughts about that. How amazing. I was expecting some kind of cable operated railway there.
Oh no, that's far too complicated. I've got that operating on one of the layouts and can't cope with that all the time. It actually happened on the Canterbury Wingham on the East Kent Railway. That's how they did their run range. So there's a prototype for it.
It's amazing, really. I was looking at something the other day that somebody sent to me, and it was a parcels office in Sheffield. And the wagons were moved around it using a kind of a cable system with capstans, where they just hooked them onto the drawbar of the parcels van and then just towed it around using a cable on a capstan. It was
well, I do that on my wagon works layout.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing. So if anybody's, as I keep saying, if anybody's got any questions they'd like to ask these guys, maybe you should just shout up.
Yeah, I'll come in here because Colin hasn't shown it, but his wagon works one is interesting because you can actually operate a wagon turntable using chain and capstan arrangement. And we had a little discussion that night, didn't we, Colin?
We did.
If you go look at very early stations, quite often the goods yard is built, if it's survived that long, the goods building is 90 degrees out of what it should be for the goods yard siding. And with very early railways, because you had lots of people and you had quite a few horses around the place, it was easier just to shunt the wagons onto a turntable and then use a horse or a chain to take the wagon off into the warehouse and deal with it there. Rather, we tend to think of a goods shed as a sort of linear thing that's in line with the siding, and the wagons run through the goods shed and get unloaded in the goods shed. But that's not the way it was. I quoted an example of I think it's Wareham goods shed, which if you go over the overpass on the road, you think, well, that's not the right way around for the station. I think the Bodmin and Weybridge, which is obviously a very, very early railway, had a sort of stack of warehouses, but they were alongside the siding with lots of wagon turntables, which you sort of came off at the right turntable into the right warehouse. So again, prototypes for everything, eh, Colin?
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that struck me was, do you have, what kind of criteria do you have to take into consideration when you're designing a track plan for a very short layout? Do you have to be aware of leaving as much point work as possible in the sector plate area of the layout, or are there some kind of hard and fast rules that you tend to abide by? Because I think you're both on at least your second micro layout, quite more in your case, Colin, I believe. But,
I don't know, really. If I see a prototype somewhere and I fancy replicating, as I did with the Wagon Works, that's what I do. But the main consideration for me, as I say, my maximum footprint I allow myself these days is 4 foot long. I've got nothing bigger than 4 foot long. And it's getting a sheet of paper, really, or graph paper, and scaling down the wagons you're going to use and what you want to get out of it, really, and moving them down. I think I'll spend far more time planning the thing than I ever do building it and then operating it, really, because if you don't get it right from the start and you spend money and time getting it done and then it doesn't operate to your satisfaction at the end of the day, it's a waste of time. So certainly that's how I plan it. I mean, during lockdown, when I couldn't get out and get much, I've often gone in the shed and found an odd piece of sundealer and brought it out and said, well, what can I put on that then? That's not quite how dunnage work, but certainly this little layout I've got here, that's how that worked. I found a bit of board and made a layout to put on it.
Yeah, I'd agree with Colin, actually, that measuring clearances is really important. I think and experimenting, because as I said, the first time I did it was 60 inches by 13. I thought it might work with four sidings, and it did not. It did not provide enough operational interest. And planning, as Colin says, to echo what he says, is really quite critical to a micro. And I would agree with Colin. I spent a lot more time planning and thinking about it than building it. When I'd actually built it, I knew what the clearances were for the wagons, and different measurements. I mean, you find out that clearances really matter. When I've got a guy, with a hand up in my Class 08, the driver, that hand actually got caught in the way of a couple of things. It just made it a little bit too wide, and I had to widen a couple of things to make sure I could get that driver in, running through the tunnel and running past other things. So clearances and planning is, again, I agree with Colin. Clearances and planning is really, really important to the micro. Make sure everything fits. The last thing you want is a goods van sort of crashing into something else when you've just finished gluing down the track.
Yeah.
on that, is there a way when you're just sort of starting out and haven't really got very much stock or locos and so on to know how big some of these things are for designing the track work? Because it's sort of, if you're collecting as you go kind of thing, you can't necessarily pre-measure it.
Good question. I would say, with this, I started small. I bought just two. I think you could just probably do it with two wagons, maybe a longer one and a shorter one from Slater's or something. I mean, that's how I started in British O, as is just a Slater's wagon and just measuring out that, and then adding another wagon to it. So it's a sort of a small investment in, I'd say, a couple of pieces of stock would be all you probably need to do to measure clearances. I mean, most things are approximately the same width, I think, in O. I mean, I could be wrong, but unless you're going for some unusual wagon, I'd say just investment in a couple of pieces of stock would enable you to measure the clearances out.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, I agree. I tend to use a mixture of 9-foot wheelbase wagons and 10-foot wheelbase wagons. And for somebody who's just starting out, if you didn't want to invest in buying anything, what you can certainly do is you can go onto the web and get drawings of RCH wagons of both those sort of wheelbases, and you can scale them back down to 7 mil, so you can know what the width of your vehicle is and what your length of it is, and length over buffers, so you can actually plan like that without buying anything.
Great, thank you.
I've just switched over to you, Jeff. You're now the host of the meeting. I think if you were to click on the top right-hand images of Jeremy and Colin and pin them both to the screen, I think by making you host, that function's now disappeared.
Okay, just before you do that, can I just, my laptop's down to 6%. Let me just plug a charger in.
Oh, right, okay. A slight technical problem there, but never mind.
Shan't be on anything, yeah.
Do you have to make all your own track work then for these micro layouts? I presume some of the commercially available point work, and that's perhaps a bit too long.
Mine's code 148. 143 Peco. So the point is actually quite a long one.
Right.
It's not sharp. And that was just gave it a smoother appearance, I felt, to it. And it was what I had on hand, because otherwise it's another, 45 quid if we're going to pick up another one. So it seemed to work quite smoothly, and it gives that smooth transition, I think, which helps the parcels coach. It doesn't look like it's on a long angle curve or something like that. So yeah. So that was one thing. And so the other thing, going back to Colin and planning and so forth. I mean, I haven't stopped creating for this layout. I've done, my next step is probably to, I may have mentioned this to you, Nick, before, is add Woodland Scenics lights to it. I've got invested in some just plug lights, so that if I'm in a low light environment, to run it in a sort of a night, as a night layout, I'm fiddling around with that and experimenting with that.
Okay, Nick, you can pass me over now, Nick, if you want.
Yeah, you are host now anyway.
Okay, yeah.
You need to pin them both to the screen. You
Um,
hover over their image. There's a burger.
On pin, I see. Got you, one, yeah.
You pin them both to the screen. That function's disappeared since I made you the host, I'm afraid.
Okay, got you. Things I learn. Okay.
Right, so over to you then.
Okay. Colin, one of the conversations that came up the other night, actually, for the benefit of others, is you did say that you were asked your minimum radius you'd used was 2 foot 4 inches.
Yeah, 28 inches. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We didn't go very far with that. And I, if I'd have been a bit more awake, perhaps it was the day of the week or the time of the night, I'm not sure which. In terms of 00, that still is round about a radius 2, which the 00 people play with, if you translated it across. In fact, I think it's 2 foot 6. But the point, what did occur to me was, and I noticed, I looked at your layouts, you're very careful with the curves. You do them very smoothly. Let's put it that way. And I think what one of the persons in the audience would have said, if I'd bothered to prompt him, was the worst curves on a layout actually aren't the curve you think you're doing. It's the kink or the dog leg that you inadvertently do.
Yeah.
Because if anything's going to lock a buffer, that's what's going to lock a buffer.
Yeah.
Jeremy, do you think that as well? In a sense, the radius of the curve is not so important as the quality of the track building and the track laying. in terms of avoiding the sort of irregular kink or something.
Yeah, that was important. Was I think with the code 143, which is a sort of a smoother radius track, I actually just I mean the negative about that is you have to cut the sleepers and do a lot of sleeper cutting because it's such a the way Peco built it it's kind of a narrow, it's so broad you just have to do some cutting there of the sleepers. But I think code 143 for me worked well because again it's smooth. It looks better on the parcels coach.
Yeah.
Which is really a piece of stock I had to think a lot more about than the other pieces of stock. Because again, it's sort of it is a bit mad putting one big piece of stock on, but it does work, and it's a lot of fun to run it. But again, that was the one where you had to have a lot of thinking about clearance and a lot of thinking about how smoothly it would run through the point.
Yeah, well, yeah. Once you've got a long vehicle, you've obviously got to think about overhang in a sense, both sides.
Right.
The front coming out of the curve, and of course overhang into the curve if the curve's a bit too sharp. Yeah, I've got an oval, so obviously overhang affects me quite a bit, either outwards and inwards. My curves are not 6 foot minimum radius by any means.
Could I come in there?
Things to help.
Yes, Keith. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Don't forget that Peco now does a range of set track, and the curves and the points might give you lower than that radius of 28.
No, the set track radius for information, Keith, is 40.5 inches.
Oh, right.
Or 1 meter and 28 mil.
That includes the point.
Yeah.
Does that include the radius of the point?
Yeah. And interestingly, they took some time to produce the point. It took a while because if you're familiar with the sort of standard Peco medium point or the curved point, in reality, it's a sort of series of radii. Although they call it a 6 foot radii point, there are some bits that are pretty straight, and other bits that are it's not exactly a smooth curve. Whereas with the set track, because they were right down to 34.5 inch, 40.5 inch, they had to have a continuous curve right the way through the point, so they couldn't have straight bits. So I think it took them longer to sort of design the point for that reason. I mean, as an example, the return on my layout is using formed by the Peco 40.5 inch. So effectively it's a 7 foot diameter return curve at my end of the layout. And I have put a set track point into that curve to serve an engine shed, and the trains run around it quite smoothly.
Yes, because
there's no deviation. Yeah,
I've used it on a couple of curves where I don't use the flexible bend it round. I've used the set track, and it as you say, it goes around quite easily.
Yeah. But what's interesting is if I've got a rake of coaches, and I do use bogey coaches, if they go over it, they don't deflect. Whereas if the point had irregular radius built into it, you would see some deflection in the bogies as they went through the point. It stays quite. Hats off to Peco, they got it right for once.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? Was there anything that helps you form those radiuses? Because I know there's like in 00, you can buy the bits that click in the middle and help you get smooth curves and so on, but I've not seen anything like that for O gauge. I don't know what people use to get nice, smooth, flexible curves, flexi-track curves.
Well, I'll have to say that when I use the curve on my 3 holes depot layout, that's where the sharp curves are. The reason they're sharp is because I used a Rivarossi set track long before Peco had brought theirs out. I found some at a second-hand model railway shop in Eastbourne, I think, and bought a load of them. And I thought, well, just cut them up, and that worked for me. So they're only short, very, very short sections of a curve, just to sort of bring the track from sort of an angle coming off the sector plate to make it straight with the edge of the board. So they're only short sections, but they are down to a 2'4". As far as gentler concerns, Pear Tree Engineering, just up the road from me, they do a series of various radii, O gauge, track set of curves, I think is the term they use. But if you have a look on Pear Tree Engineering website, you'll find them on there.
Yeah, they in fact do one down to the 40.5 inch. So if you want to form your flexible track to a Peco set track radii, you can buy, you're right, a former there. I hate to say I used I used a 00 one inside my return curve that's 40.5 inch radius. I wanted to put a goods loop, which was going to work out at 3'1" radii. And some of you might want to put your fingers in your ears, but if you don't, I bought a 3 foot radius template for 00. And if you use that on the inside of the curve, not in between the rails, but on the inside rail, that works out as 3'1" if you had to go to the center line of the track from the center line of the 00 former. So that where there's a will, there's a way. It would be nice if there were some tighter formers, because we once you get down to sharp curves, it is difficult to form them accurately, and there's always a danger that you're forming a curve sharper than you intended.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I mean, just to add another point, was it Thomas Hoy, wasn't it, Colin? The other layout on that night,
yes,
with Wapload. I mean, again, I should have challenged him. He covered himself by saying, "Oh, I use 6 foot radii, the recommended radii." What I should have said, if I'd been more than half awake, was, but you've got a reverse curve there in your layout.
Yeah.
And if you've got 6 foot one way swinging to 6 foot the other way, that is actually quite a displacement of stock if you use longer stock. So
I think what he was mentioning, the reason he mentioned that as a radii, because he had a standard Peco turnout at one end, and he had this 3-way that he bought second half off a bring and buy stand, which was the same sort of pattern as the Peco one. So that's why I think he mentioned the 6 foot. But you quite rightly say, off the 3-way into the standard Peco one was a reverse curve. So you probably wouldn't shunt long wheelbase vehicles through a head shunt, but if he did, you might find his buffers locked. Yeah.
So it's where and how you use the curves rather than the absolute radius. I think sometimes we tend to assume it's just the radius, and if you go below a certain radius, that's not good, and if you're above a certain radius, that's safe. Well, life isn't quite like that.
No, you're right.
Hey Jeff, I was just actually looking at the Markway website. They actually do O gauge templates, which looks kind of interesting. I hadn't seen them before, but up to 120 inches radius. So I thought, wow, that's
Well, that's the outside radii of a Peco curved point. I think the Peco curved point is 10 foot outside and 5'3" inside. Otherwise, it wouldn't be much of a point if you didn't go wider and sharper, so to speak.
I've actually got a set of the Markway templates just at the top there I got, but unfortunately, some of their point configurations are as long as my layout. So
I have to just jump in here and say, guys, that from a Loco builder's point of view, this is making my ears bleed. The thought of trying to build a Loco to go around a 3 foot radius curve.
Yeah. Well, this you're right, Nick. This is the problem in some ways. You've almost getting parallel standards in the guild because people who run out and buy a ready to run coach, wagon certainly, or Loco of the ones that are available outside of the sort of mega thousands ones. It usually says on the box this will run around a minimum radius of 40.5 inch, i.e. the Peco set track radius. But then if you go and get a kit or you go and buy a masterpiece or something, or you look at the sort of standards, you're told, 6 foot, don't go below that. Right. I think in a sense, we've got to talk a bit more about it. And I've got a few articles coming up in the Gazette that might help. There was one thing, Nick, I think I saw in your room while you were doing your boiler work over your left shoulder, I believe, going silent. Is that a transition curve template lurking in the corner?
Oh, no, it's a piece of somebody commissioned me to build a broad gauge Loco, Great Western broad gauge.
Oh.
And there isn't such a thing, is there? I can't go and buy Peco broad gauge track. And I have to say that also broad gauge runs on something called bridge rail, doesn't it? Which is kind of like an upside down T section. Now, luckily, the broad gauge sock do sell bridge rail, kind of extruded in nickel silver. And that's what that is. I had to build my own track so I could test the broad gauge Loco. And I've never built an inch of track in my life. And the Broad Gauge Society supply these really clever templates that automatically set the radius. But one of the guys who I built one for wanted it to go around a 5'6" radius curve, which I thought was, but it managed it because the Locos are only quite short. But anyway, sorry, I'm taking over your presentation here.
No.
It's Great Western Broad Gauge, and I'm very proud of it. It's the only track I've ever made.
Right, yeah. I didn't make it out in the corner. Yeah, I mean, there certainly is a sort of a debate to be had, and I think one of our Gazette contributors, Harold Jones, has done so, saying that if you're moving from a sort of sharpish radius, say the Peco 40.5 inch, back onto a straight, which happens on my layout, it's quite a good idea to think of a transition curve that doesn't take you abruptly from a 3'6" radii to straight, but instead sort of eases you out, say, to 5 foot or 5'6" before it dumps you onto the straight. And that obviously helps with the dreaded buffer locking.
Yeah, buffer locking. I was going to say buffer locking must be the issue because, you've got and I was quite impressed with Jeremy's layout because he'd got 060 Locos on it, hadn't he, from what I could see. And you could see an 040 Loco would go around the dinner plate anyway, wouldn't it? Because it would. But it's the buffer locking really in the end that's gonna catch you out, isn't it, with things like that?
Well, I think that's particularly where Jeremy was matching an 08 shunter with a bogey coach that I think was 57 foot long in prototype. So there you've got a mismatch. Once you get to a curve, you're going to get a bit more throw on the coach than you're going to get on the Loco, as it happens. I suspect if you went into your the siding you didn't go into with your coach, the one without the oil tanks, I suspect there you've got to watch your buffers a bit more carefully, have you? Where you're going to the point on the curve.
A little bit, yes, yeah. And I had to actually extend the couplings a little bit to make that coach work too, because it was very, very hard to hook and unhook those couplings on that coach. I had an extra ring to both ends of the coach to make it easy to couple and uncouple.
Coupling on a curve, that is there are certain places on my layout. Well, if I'm assembling a rake of coaches, I assemble them on my all of 4 foot straights. I don't try to assemble them on a curve. We've got a question here from Keith again.
No, all I'm saying is I think there were 2 articles in the Gazette about a chap getting around a very tight radius.
Yeah, it's Harold Jones. Yeah, Harold Jones. He was with us the other night when we were looking at small layouts.
He sort of dismissed the tight radius as if to say his rolling stock would go round the smaller bend.
I think the answer is you've got to watch your displacement. Once you're on the curve, even if you've got a pair of bogey coaches, they will probably throw out the same if they're the same length or near enough. Yeah. It's often the crucial one between the bogey coach and the Loco, with the Locos not throwing out so far.
Mind you, on the Great Western, they had a large buffer, didn't they? So all you could do is put large buffers on the end of your coaches and you'd probably overcome the problem.
Yeah, you could, but then it depends how much you want to sort of, or you could put a bar between the buffers, or even a triangle. Depends how much you want to depart from the prototype.
Well, the Great Western gave you all that with even oval ones as well, didn't they? So you could give you a bit of a tolerance on that.
Yeah, in a sense, I think in the issue is it's a bit black and white, the conversation at the moment. In reality, you can do certain things, but you got to think about how you do them. And that's really the lesson it's got to be. And if you just do a one size fit all edict, like the 6 foot minimum radius, it doesn't help some people. Let's put it that way.
It interests me what Colin says, because I always thought his lines went straight off his scenic board into a fiddle yard.
No, he's got
a
curves.
Straight line, no curves, just straight lines, but obviously not on.
I love curves, Keith.
I knew that was coming.
Say no more, Colin.
Yeah, we are recording, by the way.
Sorry, dear.
Yeah. So hopefully those sort of little diversions off the main track of looking at very small layouts and how to build them has excited some more questions out there. Do come in, please, with any questions you have about, in a sense, a question about layout building. We've probably all been there and could help answer your question. As long as you're not Peter Waterman. I mean, he's in the world of his own. Any questions out there? Just put your name on the chat, and we'll tell you to unmute.
Oh, we've answered everybody, I think.
Oh dear!
Right.
Or
I think they're all set, Jeff. I mean, Colin and I have just.
we've talked too much. Okay, James James wants to ask a question. James, do you want to unmute and come in?
Can I ask how you try and avoid becoming too symmetrical in very small layouts? Because all the sorts of things I've played with always end up looking very symmetrical when like doing some layout designing and so on.
Right. For my point, I always try and not make the front siding or front track, there's the viewing side of the board, parallel with the edge. If that makes sense.
Yes.
If I straighten it towards the end, so it comes in, I would try to curve it a little bit before it gets there. So if you look at the plan of Dunhill, which is on that show this morning, there's a track plan there, and you'll see the good siding actually comes away from the sector plate at an angle and doesn't run parallel with the front of the board, although the platform road does. And that tends to sort of take the eye away from it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It does, yeah, thank you.
And I would say for symmetry too, I agree with Colin. But I mean, on mine, it was a very short track, just a sort of slightly sharper angles. Track 1 and track 4 were placed to again break up the linear part of it, so that they're all running. They're just a little bit starker in terms of the angles. And I'd say that you can put a little bit of track on with a sector plate and make it look fairly decent. And one of them actually goes into the oil and tar terminal, so you can't actually see the end, but it doesn't go much further. I can only put two wagons in, and I think only one gets fully into the shed. The other one is halfway out. That's as much as I could do in that fourth siding without it just, there was just simply no more room with a 13-inch width. So you can sort of sharpen those angles a little bit, not too much, but a little bit.
Yeah.
That's quite a good point, actually. Again, if we think of the prototype, a typical country station, often the goods yard sidings look like they've sort of been laid where they wanted to go. If you've got in the model form, kind of 3 or 4 parallel sidings, it makes you think of a marshalling yard, except the rest of it's missing. In reality, sidings did wander about a bit in the prototype, didn't they?
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
So they went to where they needed to be rather than geometrically next to the one beside it.
Mine wanders about all over the place, but that's down to bad track laying.
Oh dear.
I wouldn't say that, Colin.
No, they look very nice, guys. They go to where they're needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just ask Colin, are you saying then that you don't like your front siding to be parallel with your board? Because what happens at exhibitions and hands start touching the layout?
Oh, you should see Margaret with a coupling hook. No, in all honesty, I know you get one or two, but because the layouts are so small, when we exhibit, we try not to have barriers. I'll normally take my own sort of table with me, because you got some of these venues and you're in a school and you have a job to get your knees under the desk, because I'm far too old now to stand up and operate a layout all day long. And Margaret is as well. So I tend to make them so we can sit down and operate them. And even so, they're on the table, because they're so narrow, they come back to the table if it makes sense, so we can operate them, and it leaves a bit of gap at the front, which we find is enough. And I try to leave, if I can, about 3 inches from the near side rail to the edge of the board, if that makes sense. So you've got that little gap as well. I mean, you always get the children come and want to point to the animals we got, like the rabbits and the cats and the seagulls and this, that, and the other. That's what they want to look at and see how many there is. But I haven't had a lot of problem with that, Keith, to be perfectly honest. I've had the odd one or two, but touch wood, no serious damage has ever been done.
Yeah.
And you just glare at the parents, and then that's normally enough.
Okay.
I thought you were going to say you should get Margaret to set about them.
Well, she sets about me, so. Having said that, you see, and given all that waffle about it, this little one here, you can see that there. You can see they're all straight tracks.
Yeah.
And this is the edge of the board, and so that is right there. But I mean, I don't know what the problem with that. It's never been eat yet, so. But I'll put a carrying handle on it for Margaret, so it's quite good.
God.
So I've sort of gone against my own sort of way of thinking on that one, really. But that was just because it was such a small board, is to get in what I wanted to get in.
Okay.
Can I ask one more? If there's
Any final questions?
If I can ask this one more,
Yes,
I've always been interested in double slips, but I wondered whether they're too big to get on a micro layout.
Gigantic.
Well, yeah. But more operationally interesting, maybe.
Well, if I'll jump in on that one, Jeremy, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Underneath this computer, as I said the other night, I have a plan for a Barry slip, which is like 2 points, a left-hand point and a right-hand point, for want of a better terms, into sort of woven with each other. And that's almost as the same as a double slip, but I've got that, and that's down to 3 foot radius, so I can get my Hudswell Clark tank through. And I'll probably knock about with that when the weather gets a bit worse than it is now, and try and knock that up over the winter time, and then see if I can incorporate it into a layout. I've got something in the back of my mind for that, but I've got to get past the planning authority, the domestic authorities first. As you can see, the room behind me, I've got the small bedroom, it's my railway room, but there's not a lot of room left in there.
Where did you get the plan from, Colin?
You can have a look at it. It's called a Barry slip. You can find them. You can find what a Barry slip is on the internet, because I'm not very good at explaining it, and I drew one out myself. I can't lay my hands on it at the moment, but it is like 2 points but interlaced, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
But have a look on the website for Barry slip, and then you probably draw your own up. And with being 3 foot radius turnouts, they're not a lot longer than a point on its own. I'm not explaining it very well, but I know what I mean. It's trying to
Yeah, it makes
explain it.
sense. Yeah.
It's like a left-hand point and a right-hand point facing in operation. So say, for instance, you had a left-hand point and a right-hand point that were toe-to-toe, yeah, and then bring them in over each other.
Yeah.
You get about three. You're going to make three V crossings. I think there is on there, but it's possible and it's doable. I think if I make my own track for industrial use, I mean, normally I use Peco track mainly because years ago I was given a box full of the stuff nobody wanted. I thought, oh great, so I'll use it. But when I do make my own track, I use code 100 flat bottom and on copper clad sleepers. So that's how I would make this barrier slip.
Yeah.
James, that's kind of an interesting point. I've been thinking, as Colin was saying, about, could I use a double slip instead of a sector plate? The answer is yes, but then I'd have challenges with the length of the sidings. I think if I was maintaining that 7-foot length, the double slip might dominate that, but it would be interesting to sort of lay it out in terms of planning purposes to see if it might even work, because it would probably say, you know what, I could probably get rid of the sector plate because then I've got 2 tracks, but I don't know, I'd have to really think about it and sketch it out for a while. But it's an interesting point though you've raised.
Yeah, the Peco, I mean, off the shelf, there is a Peco double slip. But I haven't got the accurate measurement, but I think it's north of 2 foot long.
I think
it's only slightly shorter than 2 Y points stuck together.
Yeah.
So certainly, yeah, it would take up the lines. I mean, because of course I think the overall radius is 6 foot, the ruling radius. So it's generously radiused, but it is quite long. It would be very difficult to put into the sort of small layout you gentlemen are thinking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be hard. I mean, it could be done, but I think I want to also keep it simple. Colin does too. I think if I don't want to speak for you, Colin, too much, but I think
no, you're absolutely right.
With one point, keep it simple.
Yeah.
Once I'd done the planning, which was the really hard part, laying down the track didn't take, and ballasting it didn't take long at all. But I also knew what the clearances were by that time, and could measure those out. No, I would probably not change the design of it I was doing again. I just want to add more variety and add a couple more different types of layout, so you keep the varieties going and you keep the scope going. And Colin's done that too with his. I mean, he's got a number of them. I'm just using the same base, but I've got a number of layouts on it as well. 2 so far, probably going to a night one, as I said, and adding lights to one of them, and then adding a West Somerset version too. That will probably just keep the variety going and using that same board and that same sector plate.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a health warning. I've been there. On a double O layout, I put a double slip in just because it looked nice. It is a lot, even with DCC, there's a lot of wiring.
Yeah.
And you have to have sort of a polarity switches lurking around somewhere. Otherwise, it all goes up in the air.
Yeah, I'd like to keep the wiring simple. Is just much more fun and easier to set up. Colin, I think, beats me on setting up time, but I mean, I'm down to about 10 minutes on mine, I think.
Yeah,
but keeping the wiring simple is really quite critical.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I think I would disagree with you there. I've done an O gauge layout in a log cabin, and the first piece of track I laid was a double slip.
Oh no!
Peco already sold as a wire to the frog.
Yeah.
And if you put frog juices, and I'm working under DCC, if you put the Tam Valley frog juices on the frogs and wire up, obviously, from the toe, I didn't have a problem at all. It went in I didn't have a problem.
Right, Keith, I shall write that down, because the moment you start
Yeah,
saying words
that's
like
a good
frog
point
juices.
too.
Well, I mean, basically, your double slip is a bit like Colin is saying. It's only 2 points, basically, which
Yeah.
is 2 frogs and blades.
Yeah.
And again, with Peco, obviously, if you follow their instructions, which were quite clear, and as I say, they'd already soldered the wire on the frog, it went straight in well.
That's good to know. That's good to know. I might give it a try next
Yeah.
time.
Just disregard my last comments, please.
I know, but I mean, I can understand what you mean, because people are sometimes fearful of going down that, because what if I get it wrong?
Yeah, that's right, precisely.
Yeah.
Especially having spent the sort of thick end of £100 on the thing.
Oh yes, exactly. That's why that was the first piece I laid.
Right. Okay, gentlemen. Look, thanks. We've had a lot of conversation about some very small layouts, and I think it's been very enjoyable, as ever, very informative. Obviously, thank you, Colin, very much, and thank you, Jeremy, very much for volunteering your layouts for
No
our
worries.
delectation and inspection, and thanks for fielding the questions. Nick, just a one for you. I haven't got the link for it. I think I'm helping you with the competition bit, but I don't think you've sent me the link.
Okay, I'll send that.
Just send it across, otherwise I'll be not joining you.
Okay, well, I'll see you at about 3:45 then.
Good for you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Bye.
Yes, thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye, Jeremy.
Bye, Colin.
Bye, see you
Bye.
next week.
Cheers. Bye.
Ta-da.
Take
Bye.
care.